On the Blue Nile, 30 kilometers from the Sudanese border, Ethiopia built a wall of concrete 1.8 kilometers wide and 145 meters tall, taller than a 40-story building, holding back a reservoir that took 4 years just to fill. Behind that wall, 74 billion cubic meters of water, enough to put Belgium under 3 meters of flood. This is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It generates 5,150 megawatts, one of the largest on the African continent. And here's the part that changes everything. For the first time since the pharaohs cut their first canal, someone upstream of Egypt controls how much water reaches the Nile. So how did a landlocked country with no oil wealth and no major Western backer pull off one of the largest hydropower projects in Africa? Directive 1 traces it, stage by stage, from empty canyon to finished structure. The Blue Nile drops almost 1,500 meters in elevation crossing Ethiopia before flattening into Sudan. That fall is stored energy, and for most of recorded history, Ethiopia could only watch it flow away. In 2011, the government chose a canyon site called Guba, 900 kilometers from Addis Ababa by road, where the river narrows between two basalt ridges. Construction went to Salini Impregilo of Italy, with Ethiopian Electric Power running the operation. The target, 6,000 megawatts of installed capacity, a reservoir spanning 1,800 square kilometers, and a price tag that settled at roughly $4 to $5 billion by most estimates. Ethiopia did not have that money. The government launched a national bond program. Civil servants contributed 1 month's salary. Soldiers, teachers, taxi drivers, farmers, tens of millions of citizens were asked to fund the project themselves. This dam was not built by a sovereign wealth fund. It was built by a country that decided it had to exist. Most people assume a structure this size needs years just to pour the foundation. The real timeline is slower than that. Foundation work at Guba took nearly 3 years on its own. The canyon floor is basalt, which sounds solid until you drill into it and find fracture zones packed with loose rock and pressurized groundwater. Engineers sank a grid of boreholes across the riverbed, some 40 meters deep, injecting cement grout under high pressure to seal every crack. Hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of grouting material went into the ground before a single meter of dam concrete was poured. Think of it as stitching the riverbed together from the inside, filling every hidden gap so the structure above would have nothing shifting beneath it. With the foundation sealed, engineers had to move the river. You cannot pour concrete into moving water. The Blue Nile was diverted through 2 tunnels, each roughly 12 meters in diameter, wide enough for a semi-truck with room to spare. Crews drilled and blasted those tunnels through solid basalt on both banks at the same time, removing hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of rock. Once the tunnels were lined with reinforced concrete and flowing, a temporary cofferdam of compacted rock and clay sealed the main channel. For the first time, the bed of the Blue Nile ran dry at Guba. The construction site was an exposed riverbed nearly 2 kilometers long. Then the real work started. Roller compacted concrete, RCC, is what made the main dam possible at this scale. It is a dry, stiff mix close to damp gravel, spread in layers about 30 centimeters thick and compacted by heavy vibratory rollers. Layer by layer, the dam wall rose from the canyon floor. Total volume, around 10 million cubic meters of RCC, enough to fill 4,000 Olympic swimming pools. Concrete plants went up directly on site. The 900-kilometer haul road from Addis Ababa was rebuilt and widened to carry cement, aggregate, and equipment in a continuous stream. At peak, the site consumed tens of thousands of tons of cement per month. Here is where it gets harder. The main dam spans the central canyon, but the terrain on the west bank rises and then drops into a shallower valley. Leave that valley open and the reservoir drains around the dam entirely, so engineers built a second structure, the Saddle Dam, stretching 5 kilometers across the floodplain, longer than Manhattan is wide. The Saddle Dam is compacted earth and rock fill, not concrete, and it required moving millions of cubic meters of material across ground that turned to mud every rainy season. 2 major structures, two entirely different construction methods, running in parallel on opposite sides of the same reservoir. The supply chain behind this project is its own story. Everything heavy came by road across the Ethiopian highlands. The 16 Francis turbines, each weighing hundreds of tons, were manufactured in Europe and China, shipped to Djibouti, then trucked 900 kilometers over mountain roads. One turbine unit is roughly the size of a 3-story house. Moving 16 of them to a remote canyon required specialized low-loader convoys, road widening, and bridge reinforcement at dozens of crossings along the route. The turbine hall sits inside the dam structure on the river's right bank, a cavern roughly 200 meters long excavated from solid rock. Workers drilled and blasted the chamber in sections, installing rock bolts and shotcrete as they went to keep the ceiling from collapsing under its own weight. The Francis turbines were lowered in, each connected by a penstock, a steel pipe, running through the dam body at steep angles from the reservoir above. Water enters a penstock, falls under the full head pressure of the reservoir, spins a turbine at roughly 128 revolutions per minute, and exits through a draft tube back into the river. 16 turbines at full generation push 5,150 megawatts onto the national grid. Ethiopia's entire pre-dam generation capacity was around 4,000 megawatts. This one structure more than doubled it. Reservoir fill began in 2020 and triggered exactly the political conflict engineers had always known was coming. Egypt depends on the Nile for the large majority of its fresh water. Sudan sits directly downstream. Ethiopia's position was straightforward. The reservoir would fill at the rate the hydrology required, not the rate Cairo demanded. By 2023, after 3 filling seasons, the reservoir held enough water for the first turbines to begin commercial operation. Each season reduced downstream flow by billions of cubic meters. Arguably, for the first time in modern history, a country upstream of Egypt held physical leverage over the river's volume, not through treaties, not through diplomacy, but through 145 meters of concrete across the Blue Nile. The strangest part, looking at the engineering record, is how few major structural failures were reported during construction. A project this complex, remote site, difficult geology, 2 dams built in parallel, national bond financing, heavy equipment crossing hundreds of kilometers of mountain road, ran years behind schedule, but it ran. The spillway, designed to pass up to 15,000 cubic meters per second in flood conditions, was tested by the same seasonal floods that delayed construction. It held. Put yourself in the position of an Ethiopian power engineer in 2011, handed a mandate to build one of Africa's largest dams on bond money from teachers and taxi drivers. 13 years later, 5,000 megawatts are flowing. 16 turbines are turning. A reservoir the size of a small city sits behind a wall that took 10 million cubic meters of concrete to build. Is this justice for a continent that spent a century watching its rivers controlled by others? Comment yes or no. We read everyone. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is not finished as a project. Transmission lines still need to reach the villages that funded it. Regional power trading agreements with Sudan and beyond are still being negotiated. But the structure is done. 1.8 kilometers of concrete across the Blue Nile, 145 meters of head, 5,150 megawatts. In the long recorded history of the Nile, nothing on this scale has been built upstream of Egypt. Almost every great river on Earth hides a build this audacious somewhere in its canyon. Which mega project should Directive One take apart next, and where are you watching from?